The following scenario is hypothetical and presented for educational and entertainment purposes. The year is 2026, but not the one you recognize. Imagine a world where the elegance of zero never graced the parchment of history, where the revolutionary shift to place value notation, the simple idea that the position of a digit determines its power, was strangled in its crib. Without the decimal system spreading from India through the Silk Road, the global intellect remains shackled to the clunky, additive weight of Roman numerals and complex abacus tallies. In this reality, the digital age is a physical nightmare of brass gears and room-sized counting frames, and the simple act of calculating a trajectory or a tax rate requires a priesthood of mathematicians. Science hasn't stopped, but it has become heavy, mechanical, and excruciatingly slow, leading to a steampunk dystopia where the lack of an efficient language for nothing has made the cost of everything infinite. In the sprawling, smog-choked metropolis of Neo-Byzantium, the air vibrates with the rhythmic clicking of millions of wooden beads. This is the heartbeat of a world that never learned to simplify. Here, the great calculation is not performed by silicon chips, but by the Logos engineers, thousands of clerks operating massive steam-driven analytical machines the size of cathedrals. Because the world relies on additive systems, where the number 3888 is written as the cumbersome MMMDCCL8, the sheer physical space required to record a single bank transaction or a celestial coordinate is immense. Paper is a luxury surpassed only by the ink needed to write out the sprawling strings of characters. Science, as we know it, is a grueling marathon of manual transcription. The fundamental problem lies in the calculation barrier. In our world, the decimal system allows a child to multiply large numbers with a pencil and a few rules. In this parallel 2026, such a task is a graduate-level feat of mental gymnastics. This computational drag has fundamentally altered the laws of physics, not because the universe changed, but because our ability to describe it is fractured. Calculus, the mathematics of change, is almost non-existent. Without a fluid way to express infinitesimal values and limits, the transition from static geometry to dynamic motion remains a mystery. Engineers still build, but they build with massive margins of error. Bridges are unnecessarily thick, ships are dangerously heavy, and the concept of aerodynamics is a theoretical fringe science. The social cost is even more staggering. In this timeline, the Enlightenment never truly broke the hold of the elite. Since advanced math is so prohibitively difficult to learn, it remains a guarded secret of the state and the megacorporations. Knowledge is literally power, locked behind the complexity of the Cistercian grids and the Archimedean scrolls. If you cannot calculate, you cannot own property, you cannot verify a contract, and you certainly cannot challenge the government's tally of your debt. The world is divided between the numerate elite and the vague masses, a society where the inability to define zero has created a void in human rights. But as the empires of Neo-Europe and the Khanate of the East push their mechanical limits to the breaking point, a young scribe in the royal archives discovers a dusty, heretical manuscript from the lost House of Wisdom, containing a single terrifying symbol that looks like a small, empty circle. As she traces the ink of this forbidden O, she realizes that this isn't just a symbol for nothing. It is a key that could collapse the entire weight of the empire's bureaucracy by making their massive engines obsolete overnight. But before she can share the discovery, the heavy iron boots of the numerology police echo down the hallway, their brass lanterns cutting through the dark. The discovery of the empty circle, the shunya, or the zero, is not merely a mathematical curiosity. It is a weapon of mass disruption. In this world of 2026, the global economy is a precarious house of cards built on additive logic. When a merchant in the Mediterranean wants to trade with a silk lord in the East, the transaction doesn't take seconds, it takes weeks of physical verification. Massive ledgers, bound in iron and transported by armored carriages, serve as the only proof of wealth. The sheer physical mass of information is the ultimate stabilizer of the status quo. If you can simplify a 1,000-page ledger into a single string of place value digits, you don't just save time, you annihilate the very infrastructure of the ruling class. The scribe Alara realizes that the symbol for nothingness is the only thing that can truly represent everything. She manages to slip the manuscript into a hollowed-out mechanical slide rule just as the numerology police shatter the oak doors of the archive. The enforcement of the additive law is brutal because it is necessary for survival. The great empires of this timeline are constantly at war, not over ideology, but over the physical resources required to maintain their bureaucracies. Since they cannot calculate complex logistics, their armies are bloated, slow-moving behemoths. To feed a legion, you need a literal mountain of paperwork. To aim a cannon, you need a team of 10 men working a mechanical brass integrator for 20 minutes. This inefficiency makes war a grinding, decades-long affair, where the only way to win is through sheer attrition and the sacrifice of millions. The lack of a decimal system means that the concept of probability and statistics is in its infancy. Generals cannot calculate the odds of a successful flank. They simply throw bodies at the problem until the problem disappears or they run out of men. In the high-walled laboratories of the alchemical ministry, the race is on to develop the Great Differential. This is a hypothetical machine that could automate the multiplication of Roman numerals using a series of nested gears and steam pistons. The ministry believes that whoever builds this machine first will rule the world for 1,000 years. But they are failing because they are trying to solve a linguistic problem with physical hardware. They are trying to build a faster horse when the world needs an engine. Alara, now a fugitive in the soot-stained underbelly of the city, meets a clandestine group of rationalists. These are underground scholars who believe that the universe is governed by simple laws if only they had the right language to speak them. They operate in the shadows of the massive abacus towers, using stolen chalk to practice the forbidden art of place value notation. The tension reaches a breaking point when the ministry announces the completion of the Vatican engine, a brass monstrosity that occupies 3 city blocks and is designed to calculate the national debt in under a year. It is a symbol of absolute control, a physical manifestation of the complexity that keeps the masses in chains. Alara's group plans a daring infiltration, not to destroy the engine, but to infect it with the concept of zero. If they can force a machine designed for additive logic to process a null value in a place value context, the mechanical contradictions will cause a catastrophic feedback loop. As she stands before the towering wall of clicking brass gears, Alara realizes that the smallest digit, the one that represents nothing, is about to carry the heaviest weight in human history. She reaches for the central input crank, her hand trembling as she prepares to enter a value the machine was never built to understand, unaware that the lead engineer is watching her from the shadows with a look of terrifying recognition. The lead engineer, a man named Valerius, whose mind is a labyrinth of brass and logic, does not move to stop Alara. Instead, he watches with a predatory fascination. In this world of 2026, the elite have long suspected that a simpler way to count existed, but they suppressed it because complexity is the ultimate gatekeeper. If a peasant can calculate their own interest rates, the usurer loses his power. If a soldier can calculate the trajectory of a shell, the high priest of ballistics loses his divinity. Valerius steps into the flickering gaslight, his shadow stretching across the thousands of rotating cylinders that comprise the Vatican engine. He explains that the ministry hasn't been trying to build a calculator. They have been building a cage for information. By making math physical, they have made it controllable. But now, as the empires of the West and the Khanate mobilize for the Century War, A conflict fueled by the inability to accurately divide territory or resources. The old systems are grinding to a halt under their own massive friction. The mechanical friction is literal. The heat generated by the Vatican engine's millions of moving parts requires a diverted river to keep it from melting into a slag of bronze. Alara realizes that the entire global economy is essentially a thermodynamic nightmare. Because they use additive systems, every calculation requires more energy, more coal, and more steam than the last. The world is literally burning itself alive just to keep its checkbooks balanced. Valerius offers Alara a choice: join the ministry and use the Zero to refine their engines into weapons of absolute precision, or be erased. He demonstrates the stakes by pointing to a massive brass map of the borderlands. Because their logistics are so flawed, the current war has lasted 40 years, with 5 million deaths resulting not from combat, but from the simple mathematical error of sending winter coats to the desert and grain to the sea. Alara refuses. She understands that the Zero isn't a tool for the state. It is a philosophy of the void that allows for infinite expansion. She thrusts the heretical manuscript into the engine's primary gear train. The result is not a simple jam, but a conceptual collapse. As the machine tries to process a place value 0 within an additive framework, the gears begin to spin at impossible speeds. The logic gates, designed to only add and subtract physical quantities, scream as they encounter the mathematical representation of nothing occupying a place. The Vatican engine begins to shake the very foundations of Neo-Byzantium. The steam pressure gauges redline, and the rhythmic clicking becomes a chaotic roar of metal shearing against metal. Outside, the city is in a panic. The great abacus towers, which relay financial data across the empire via semaphore, begin to stutter. The value crush has begun. Without the engine to verify the imperial debts, the currency, based on physical weight and complex Roman tallies, loses all meaning. In the streets, people realize that the numbers they have lived by are lies. The Empire's soldiers, waiting for their pay in sacks of heavy brass coin, find that the clerks can no longer tell them how much they are owed. As the Vatican engine's central boiler reaches critical mass, Alara escapes into the steam-filled vents, carrying the only copy of the Decimal Manifesto. She flees toward the border, knowing that the Empire is blind, but she soon discovers that the Khanate's iron-calculating legions have already crossed the frontier, guided by a mysterious new logic that seems to anticipate her every move. The border between the dying Empire and the encroaching Khanate is a graveyard of abandoned brass machinery, where the skeletons of steam tanks lie rusted because their navigators couldn't calculate the fuel-to-weight ratio for the return journey. As Alara stumbles through the frozen mud of the no-man's land, she realizes the horrifying truth. The Khanate didn't discover the Zero. They discovered how to weaponize the lack of it. In this parallel 2026, the Eastern scholars have developed negative logic, a system that thrives on the very inefficiencies that are crushing the West. While the Empire tries to build bigger machines to handle bigger Roman numerals, the Khanate has perfected the art of mathematical sabotage. They send agents to slip null values into the Empire's additive ledgers, causing entire provincial economies to collapse under the weight of ghost debts and imaginary taxes. It is a war of attrition where the side that can endure the most confusion wins. Alara is captured not by soldiers, but by logic hunters, specialized units equipped with ear trumpets and mechanical sensors designed to detect the rhythmic clicking of an abacus from miles away. They bring her to the mobile command center of the Khanate's supreme calculator, a man whose skin is tattooed with the sprawling, infinite sequences of the Fibonacci spiral, rendered entirely in clunky, non-positional tally marks. He explains that the Khanate doesn't want her Decimal Manifesto to liberate the people. They want it to create a singularity of information. By adopting place value notation in secret while the rest of the world remains trapped in additive chaos, the Knet would effectively become gods. They could calculate the trajectory of an arrow before it leaves the bow, while their enemies are still arguing over the Roman numeral for the wind's velocity. The Supreme Calculator reveals his master plan, the Great Reset. He intends to broadcast a series of corrupted mathematical proofs across the global semaphore network. These proofs, designed to be processed by the world's remaining analytical engines, contain a hidden decimal virus. It will force every gear and every piston in the world to attempt a division by zero, a concept that, in an additive world, manifests as a physical request for infinite mechanical motion. The world's infrastructure won't just stop, it will tear itself apart in a frenzy of kinetic energy. Alara realizes that the zero she carried as a light of truth is being turned into a black hole that will swallow civilization. She is chained to a massive brass transmitter, forced to watch as the first null signal is sent out across the horizon, lighting up the semaphore towers like a string of dying stars. As the vibration of the Great Reset begins to shake the ground beneath them, Alara notices a flaw in the calculator's own logic. He has used additive math to calculate the deployment of his decimal weapon. In his arrogance, he forgot that the zero is not just a number, but a placeholder for the infinite. She realizes that if she can manually adjust the transmitter's primary alignment by just one place, the entire signal will invert, targeting the Khanate's own command centers instead of the global network. With the last of her strength, she lunges for the brass calibration wheel, her fingers catching on the sharp edges of the Roman gears. As the world's mechanical heart reaches a screaming crescendo, the sky begins to glow with a strange, binary light, and Alara wonders if she is saving the world or simply ensuring that when the smoke clears, there will be absolutely nothing left to count.